Good evening from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. The time is 6:13 p.m. on the 24th of June 2025, Tuesday. And I thought I'd continue reading the wonderful short stories from W. Somerset. It is Somerset, yes. More. The Ant and the Grasshopper. When I was a very small boy, I was made to learn by heart certain of the fables of La Fontaine, and the moral of each was carefully explained to me. Among those I learnt was, The Ant and the Grasshopper, which is devised to bring home to the young the useful lesson that in an imperfect world industry is rewarded and giddiness punished. In this admirable fable, I apologise for telling something which everyone is politely but inexactly supposed to know. The ant spends a laborious summer gathering its winter store, while the grasshopper sits on a blade of grass, singing to the sun. Winter comes, and the ant is comfortably provided for, but the grasshopper has an empty larder. He goes to the ant and begs for a little food. Then the ant gives him her classic answer. What were you doing in the summertime? Saving your presents? I sang all night and all day. You sang. Why, then go and dance. I do not ascribe it to perversity on my part, but rather to the inconsequence of childhood, which is deficient in moral sense, that I could never quite reconcile myself to the lesson. My sympathies were with the grasshopper, and for some time I never saw an ant without putting a foot on it. In the summary, and as I have discovered since, entirely human fashion, I sought to express my disapproval of prudence and common sense. I could not help thinking of this fable when the other day I saw George Ramsay lunching by himself in a restaurant. I never saw anyone wear an expression of such deep gloom. He was staring into space. I don't think they mean the modern day George Ramsay, the chef. He would have only been a child when he died, or depends how old he is. I think he'd be about my age. Anyway, it just threw me a little bit. I think George Ramsay was one of the prime ministers in the UK at one stage. I think. Shall we Google it? Because I'm not sure and I'm stammering over my words and I simply cannot promote misinformation on YouTube. They've punished you severely, and then later on, when they found out you were right all along, they don't even have the hubris to apologise to you. But we'll let it go, shall we? The entire globe's been poisoned, and there were plenty complicit in that. But we'll let it go for the sake of heaven, if not for the sake of peace. George Ramsay. There are some things, the Mama T, never ever fucking lets go of though. So perhaps I shan't let go of it. Perhaps I shall hold on to that rage till the day I die, since you cost me grandchildren. Right, George Ramsay. Must be a different George Ramsay because he was the 9th Earl of Dalhousie, the former governor of Nova Scotia, who died in 1838. Perhaps he was referencing him though. It's all getting very confusing now. The mama too feels ever so slightly confused. Why won't it come up with other George Ramsays? One says chef, so I was right about our contemporary George Ramsay. Definitely is a chef. Quite a hostile, swearing, vulgar, bad-tempered character, but never mind. I'm not opposed to the vernacular myself, but there's time and there's place. There's another George Ramsay from the Aston Villa who was a Scottish footballer. Well, anyway, we just must assume that he's talking about a different George Ramsay. Just what I said in the beginning. Round and round we go, going nowhere, round and round. I know, it's annoying. It's annoying sometimes. Right. He saw him lunching by himself in a restaurant. What's wrong with that? When you're alone, it's what you do. Are you supposed to give up eating just because, you're a loner and you haven't found salubrious, integral, honorific company? Jesus. Not Jesus, but you know what I mean. Right. I never saw anyone wear an expression of such deep gloom. She was obviously upset about having to dine alone. He was staring into space. He looked as though the burden of the whole world sat on his shoulders. I was sorry for him. I suspected at once that his unfortunate brother had been causing trouble again. I went up to him and held out my hand. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm not in hilarious spirits," he answered. "Is it Tom again?" He sighed. "Yes, it's Tom again." "Why don't you chuck him? You've done everything in the world for him. You must know by now that he's quite hopeless." I suppose every family has a black sheep. I'm proud to be the black sheep of my pedophile enabling family. Very proud. I'll die on my own sword, full of pride, being the only one to stand up and be counted, while the other motherfuckers thought they could destroy me. Cowards and curs and dogs. Just saying. Right, where were we? Let's carry on. Told you I get triggered, but black sheep's one of my trigger words. Right, where were we? Tom had been a sore trial to his for 20 years. I find it interesting that Somerset Maugham writes often about, estrangements and black sheeps of families. Makes me wonder if he too had been the black sheep in his family, like all good writers and artists and, often creative and interesting people who have soul. Tom had been a sore trial to his for 20 years. He had begun life decently enough. He went into business, married, and had 2 children. Oh, dear goddess. The Ramsays were perfectly respectable people, and there was every reason to suppose that Tom Ramsay would have a useful and honourable career. But one day, without warning, he announced that he didn't like work and that he wasn't suited for marriage. He wanted to enjoy himself. He would listen to no expostulations. I'm choking on that. Well, I could have enjoyed myself had I not been surrounded by vermin, stranglers and rapists, but never mind. It's not about me, is it? No. He left his wife and his office. He had a little money, and he spent 2 happy years in the various capitals of Europe. Rumours of his doings reached his relations from time to time, and they were profoundly shocked. He certainly had a very good time. They shook their heads and asked what would happen when his money was spent. They soon found out he borrowed. He was charming and unscrupulous. I have never met anyone to whom it was more difficult to refuse a loan. He made a steady income from his friends, and he made friends easily. But he always said that the money you spent on necessities was boring. The money that was amusing to spend was the money you spent on luxuries. Yeah, I can kind of see that. I understand that mentality. But one has to pay one's bills and keep one's head above water. 2 realities of life, death and taxes. For this he depended on his brother George. He did not waste his charm on him. George was a serious man and insensible to such enticements. George was respectable. Once or twice he fell to Tom's promises of amendment and gave him considerable sums in order that he might make a fresh start. On these, Tom bought a motor car and some very nice jewellery. But when circumstances forced George to realise that his brother would never settle down, and he washed his hands of him, Tom, without a qualm, began to blackmail him. It was not very nice for a respectable lawyer to find his brother shaking cocktails behind the bar of his favourite restaurant, or to see him waiting on the box seat of a taxi outside his club. Tom said that to serve in a bar or to drive a taxi was a perfectly decent occupation, but if George would oblige him with a couple of £100. Now, a couple of £100 in the old days, you could buy a house for that. That was a shit ton of money. He didn't mind, for the honour of the family, giving it up. George paid. Once Tom nearly went to prison. George was terribly upset. He went into the whole discreditable affair. Really, Tom had gone too far. He had been wild, thoughtless and selfish, but he had never before done anything dishonest, by which George meant illegal, and if he were prosecuted, he would assuredly be convicted. But you cannot allow your only brother to go to jail. The man Tom had cheated, a man called Cronshaw, was vindictive. He was determined to take the matter into court. He said Tom was a scoundrel and should be punished. It cost George an infinite deal of trouble and £500 to settle the affair. I have never seen him in such a rage as when he heard that Tom and Cronshaw had gone off together to Monte Carlo the moment they cashed the cheque. They spent a happy month there. For 20 years, Tom raced and gambled, philandered with the prettiest girls, danced, ate in the most expensive restaurants, and dressed beautifully. He always looked as if he had just stepped out of a bandbox. Though he was 46, you would never have taken him for more than 35. He was a most amusing companion, and though you knew he was perfectly worthless, you could not but enjoy his society. He had high spirits, an unfailing gaiety, and incredible charm. I never grudged the contributions he regularly levied on me for the necessities of his existence. I never lent him £50 without feeling that I was in his debt. Tom Ramsay knew everyone and everyone knew Tom Ramsay. You could not approve of him, but you could not help liking him. Poor George, only a year older than his scapegrace brother, looked 60. He had never taken more than a fortnight's holiday in the year for a quarter of a century. He was in his office every morning at 9:30 and never left it till 6. He was honest, industrious, and worthy. He had a good wife to whom he had never been unfaithful, even in thought, and 4 daughters to whom he was the best of fathers. He made a point of saving a third of his income, and his plan was to retire at 55 to a little house in the country where he proposed to cultivate his garden and play golf. His life was blameless. He was glad that he was growing old, because Tom was growing old too. He rubbed his hands and said, "It was all very well when Tom was young and good-looking, but he's only a year younger than I am. In 4 years he'll be 50. He won't find life so easy then. I shall have £30,000 by the time I'm 50. For 25 years I've said that Tom would end in the gutter, and we shall see how he likes that. We shall see if it really pays best to work or be idle." Poor George. I sympathised with him. I wondered now, as I sat down beside him, what infamous thing Tom had done. George was evidently very much upset. "Do you know what's happened now?" he asked of me. I was prepared for the worst. I wondered if Tom had got into the hands of the police at last. George could hardly bring himself to speak. "You're not going to deny that all my life I've been hard-working, decent, respectable, and straightforward? After a life of industry and thrift, I can look forward to retiring on a small income in gilt-edged securities. I've always done my duty in that state of life in which it has pleased Providence to place me." "True." "And you can't deny that Tom has been an idle, worthless, dissolute, and dishonourable rogue. If there were any justice, he'd be in the workhouse." "True." George grew red in the face. "A few weeks ago he became engaged to a woman old enough to be his mother, and now she's died and left him everything she had. £500,000, a yacht, a house in London, and a house in the country." George Ramsay bet his clenched fist on the table. "Sorry, table, you didn't deserve that. It's not fair, I tell you. It's not fair. Damn it! It's not fair." I could not help it. I burst into a shout of laughter as I looked at George's wrathful face. I rolled in my chair. I very nearly fell on the floor. George never forgave me, but Tom often asks me to excellent dinners in his charming house in Mayfair, and if he occasionally borrows a trifle from me, that is merely from force of habit. It is never more than a sovereign. The end. So the next story is called The Pool, and it's a longish one, but I think we can knock it out of the park in what usually end up being 3-hour videos, but we may have to split it up. If it's more than 3 hours, then we have a problem, Houston. But in the meantime, in Psychedelic Dreamers' world, in Titania's realm, in the sacred space of the industrious and unassailable Tanya, we'll just carry on, shall we, guy friends and girlfriends, and see if we can knock this one out of the park. The Pool. When I was introduced to Lawson by Chaplin, the owner of the Hotel Metropole at Apia, I paid no particular attention to him. We were sitting in the lounge over an early cocktail, and I was listening with amusement to the gossip of the island. Chaplin entertained me. He was, by profession, a mining engineer, and perhaps it was characteristic of him that he had settled in a place where his professional attainments were of no possible value. It was, however, generally reported that he was an extremely clever mining engineer. He was a small man, neither fat nor thin, with black hair, scanty on the crown, turning grey, and a small untidy moustache. His face, partly from the sun and partly from liquor, was very red. He was but a figurehead, for the hotel, though so grandly named, but a frame building of 2 stories, was managed by his wife, a tall, gaunt Australian of 45, with an imposing presence and a determined air. The little man, excitable and often tipsy, was terrified of her, and the stranger soon heard of domestic quarrels in which she used her fist and her foot in order to keep him in subjection. She had been known, after a night of drunkenness, to confine him for 24 hours to his own room, and then he could be seen, afraid to leave his prison, talking somewhat pathetically from his veranda to people in the street below. He was a character, and his reminiscences of a varied life, whether true or not, made him worth listening to. So that when Lawson strolled in, I was inclined to resent the interruption. Although not midday, it was clear that he had had enough to drink, and it was, without enthusiasm, that I yielded to his persistence and accepted his offer of another cocktail. I knew already that Chaplain's head was weak. The next round, which in common politeness I should be forced to order, would be enough to make him lively, and then Mrs. Chaplin would give me black looks. Nor was there anything attractive in Lawson's appearance. He was a little thin man with a long, sallow face and a narrow, weak chin, a prominent nose, large and bony, and great, shaggy, black eyebrows. They gave him a peculiar look. Can you tell I had my eyebrows done today? They're always dark the first week or so, and then they fade to grey. Oh, but it's all right. I scrub up okay. I scrub up okay once every 7 weeks. I look like the mama too from the 12 goddess. Oh, it's all very exciting, boys, but nothing happens in psychedelic dreams world. We're still dreaming of my true love, the one, the only one, with eyes only for me, but not obsessionally or control drama or abusive, Someone lovely, with genuine, heartfelt intentions and sweetness and kindness. No envy or enmity, humiliations in public. Someone should have a boot firmly planted up his arse for that one, but let it go, let it go. Not my monkey, not my circus. Some other woman's problem, child. Anyway, the gods and Phoebe gifted me 2 gentlemen to love and to potentially love me back when they get used to the mama tea. They come to me in the form of 2 little roosters in their feathery forms, cockatiel and an Indian ringneck, but I take the love where it comes to me, willingly and joyously and sweetly and heartfelt and sincere. Why not? Everyone deserves their one true love, don't they? Even the mama tea. I'm gonna have that engraved on my headstone one day. But don't freak out, because my ashes will be scattered over Byron Bay Lighthouse. There will be no headstone. But you can write that in the sky. Everyone deserves their one true love, even me. Anyway. So his great shaggy black eyebrows gave him a peculiar look. His eyes, very large and very dark, were magnificent. Oh, I do like men with amazing, beautiful eyes. My mother was the same. She married my father, David Phillips. Do you know the real reason why my silly mother married my father, David Phillips? For his amazingly beautiful blue eyes. They were beautiful, but mad and dangerous and insincere. That set quite the pattern for the mama tea in early childhood, did it not? The motherfuckers. Anyway, again, triggering. We're going to go. What are we going to do? What do we do on this channel when we get triggered? We go delete, 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 and the typewriter platen goes flying off into the void, and we're remaking a new love story for the mama tea, one where she's surrounded by good, kind, honouring people. Mama tea has spoken. It's a work in progress. I've been working at that for 60 fucking years, but it could happen one day. We're working on it. Some of you are working with me too. To my beautiful Kylie, you're a sweet soul and I do love you. Maybe not beautiful today, but it's not just that, it's her sweetness to me. She said, you deserve a true love one day, Tanya. You deserve it more than most people because of what you've endured. You deserve people that don't play cruel games with your heart and mind. And it's true. Blessed be. Anyway, where were we? Moving on. There's no motherfucker ever gets to destroy me. His eyes, very large and very dark, were magnificent. And I feel like forever to touch you, 'cause I know that you feel me somehow. Never mind. I'm whistling that little melody to my little Kermie and Bo in case one of them might start singing Iris for me one day. Oh, sad but true. But it kind of amuses me as well. Like it's funny. It'd be so sweet if one day I'm sitting in the studio with my boys and one of them goes, I'll just fall off my perch and die laughing, shall I? It's one way one could go. It's one way one could go. Also, it's art. Mama will do anything for art. Almost anything. Let's be careful what we say here. Right. He was jolly, but his jollity did not seem to me sincere. It was on the surface a mask which he wore to deceive the world, and I suspected that it concealed a mean nature. Sounds a bit like my fucking mother there, actually, but never mind. He was plainly anxious to be thought a good sport, and he was hail fellow well met. But I do not know why. I felt that he was cunning and shifty. Always trust your instincts, people. Always. He talked a great deal in a raucous voice, and he and Chaplin capped one another's stories of beanos which had become legendary, stories of wet nights at the English Club, of shooting expeditions where an incredible amount of whisky had been consumed, and of jaunts to Sydney of which their pride was that they could remember nothing from the time they landed to the time they sailed. A pair of drunken swine. You know the times, don't you? Alas. But even in their intoxication, for by now, after 4 cocktails each, neither was sober, there was a great difference between Chaplin, rough and vulgar, and Lawson. Lawson might be drunk, but he was certainly a gentleman. A gentleman, people there. Not it is starving for a gentleman. Always wonders. At last he got out of his chair, a little unsteadily. Well, I'll be getting along home, he said. See you before dinner. Mrs. all right? Said Chaplin. Yes. He went out. There was a peculiar note in the monosyllable of his answer, which made me look up. Good chap, said Chaplin flatly. I nearly said Lapland Chapley, which is a spoonerism, people are there. Good chap, said Chaplin flatly, and as Lawson went out of the door into the sunshine, one of the best. Pity he drinks. This, from Chaplin, was an observation not without humour. And when he's drunk he wants to fight people. Is he often drunk? Dead drunk, 3 or 4 days a week. It's the island done it, and Ethel. Who's Ethel? Ethel's his wife, married a half-caste, old Brevol's daughter. Took her away from here, only thing to do. But she couldn't stand it, and now they're back again. He'll hang himself one of these days if he don't drink himself to death. Good chap. Nasty when he's drunk. Chaplin belched loudly. I'll go and put my head under the shower. I oughtn't to have had that last cocktail. It's always the last one that does you in. He looked uncertainly at the staircase as he made up his mind to go to the cubbyhole in which was the shower, and then, with unnatural seriousness, got up. Pay you to cultivate, Lawson, he said. A well-read chap, You'd be surprised when he's sober. Clever, too. Worth talking to. Chaplin had told me the whole story in these few speeches. When I came in towards evening from a ride along the seashore, Lawson was again in the hotel. He was heavily sunk in one of the cane chairs in the lounge, and he looked at me with glassy eyes. It was plain that he had been drinking all the afternoon. He was torpid, and the look on his face was sullen and vindictive. His glance rested on me for a moment, but I could see that he did not recognize me. 2 or 3 other men were sitting there, shaking dice, and they took no notice of him. His condition was evidently too usual to attract attention. I sat down and began to play. "You're a damned sociable lot," said Lawson suddenly. He got out of his chair and waddled with bent knees towards the door. I do not know whether the spectacle was more ridiculous than revolting. When he had gone, one of the men sniggered. "Lawson's fairly soused today," he said. "If I couldn't carry my liquor better than that," said another, "I'd climb on the wagon and stay there." Who would have thought that this wretched object was in his way a romantic figure, or that his life had in it those elements of pity and terror which the theorist tells us are necessary to achieve the effect of tragedy? I did not see him again for 2 or 3 days. I was sitting one evening on the first floor of the hotel on a veranda that overlooked the street when Lawson came up and sank into a chair beside me. He was quite sober. He made a casual remark, and then, when I had replied somewhat indifferently, added with a laugh which had in it an apologetic tone, "I was devilish soused the other day." I did not answer. There was really nothing to say. I pulled away at my pipe in the vain hope of keeping the mosquitoes away, and looked at the natives going home from their work. They walked with long steps, slowly, with care and dignity, and the soft patter of their naked feet was strange to hear. Their dark hair, curling or straight, was often white with lime, and then they had a look of extraordinary distinction. They were tall and finely built. Then a gang of Solomon Islanders, indentured labourers, passed by singing. They were shorter and slighter than the Samoans, coal black, with great heads of fuzzy hair dyed red. Now and then a white man drove past in his buggy or rode into the hotel yard. In the lagoon 2 or 3 schooners reflected their grace in the tranquil water. "I don't know what there is to do in a place like this except to get soused," said Lawson at last. "Don't you like Samoa?" I asked casually, for something to say. "It's pretty, isn't it?" The word he chose seemed so inadequate to describe the unimaginable beauty of the island that I smiled, and smiling, I turned to look at him. I was startled by the expression of those fine, sombre eyes of his, an expression of intolerable anguish. They betrayed a tragic depth of emotion of which I should never have thought him capable. But the expression passed away and he smiled. His smile was simple and a little naive. It changed his face so that I wavered in my first feeling of aversion from him. I was all over the place when I first came out, he said. He was silent for a moment. I went away for good about 3 years ago, but I came back. He hesitated. My wife wanted to come back. She was born here, you know. Oh, yes. He was silent again, and then hazarded a remark about Robert Louis Stevenson. He asked me if I had been up to Vailima. For some reason, he was making an effort to be agreeable to me. He began to talk of Stevenson's books, and presently the conversation drifted to London. I suppose Covent Garden's still going strong, he said. I think I miss the opera as much as anything here. Have you seen Tristan and Isolde? He asked me the question as though the answer was really important to him, and when I said, a little casually I dare say, that I had, he seemed pleased. He began to speak of Wagner, not as a musician, but as the plain man who received from him an emotional satisfaction that he could not analyse. I suppose Bayreuth was the place to go, really, he said. I never had the money, worse luck, but of course one might do worse than Covent Garden. All the lights and the women dressed up to the nines, and the music. The first act of the Valkyries, all right, isn't it? And the end of Tristan. Golly! His eyes were flashing now, and his face was lit up, so that he hardly seemed the same man. There was a flush on his sallow, thin cheeks, and I forgot that his voice was harsh and unpleasant. There was even a certain charm about him. By George, I'd like to be in London tonight. Do you know the Pall Mall restaurant? I used to go there a lot. Piccadilly Circus, with the shops all lit up, and the crowd. I think it's stunning to stand there and watch the buses and taxis streaming along as though they'd never stop. And I like the Strand too. What are those lines about God and Charing Cross? I was taken aback. Thompson's, do you mean? I asked. I quoted them. But when so sad thou canst not sadder cry, and upon thy so sore loss shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder, pitched between heaven and Charing Cross. He gave a faint sigh. I've read The Hound of Heaven. It's a bit of all right. It's generally thought so, I murmured. You don't meet anybody here who's read anything. They think it's swank. There was a wistful look on his face, and I thought I divined the feeling that made him come to me. I was a link with the world he regretted, and a life that he would know no more. Because not so very long before I had been in the London which he loved, he looked upon me with awe and envy. He had not spoken for 5 minutes, perhaps, when he broke out with words that startled me by their intensity. "I'm fed up," he said. "I'm fed up." "Then why don't you clear out?" I asked. His face grew sullen. "My lungs are a bit dicky. I couldn't stand an English winter now." I know the feeling there, baby boys and baby girls. Alas. At that moment, another man joined us on the veranda, and Lawson sank into a moody silence. "It's about time for a dram," said the newcomer. "Who'll have a drop of scotch with me? Lawson?" Lawson seemed to arise from a different world. He got up. "Let's go down to the bar," he said. When he left me, I remained with a more kindly feeling towards him than I should have expected. He puzzled and interested me. And a few days later, I met his wife. I knew they had been married for 5 or 6 years, and I was surprised to see that she was still extremely young. When he married her, she could not have been more than 16. She was adorably pretty. She was no darker than a Spaniard, small and very beautifully made, with tiny hands and feet, and a slight, lithe figure. Her features were lovely. But I think what struck me most was the delicacy of her appearance. The half-caste, as a rule, have a certain coarseness. They seem a little roughly formed, but she had an exquisite daintiness which took your breath away. There was something extremely civilized about her, so that it surprised you to see her in those surroundings, and you thought of those famous beauties who had set all the world talking at the court of the Emperor Napoleon III. Though she wore but a muslin frock and a straw hat, she wore them with an elegance that suggested the woman of fashion. She must have been ravishing when Lawson first saw her. He had but lately come out from England to manage the local branch of an English bank, and, reaching Samoa at the beginning of the dry season, he had taken a room at the hotel. He quickly made the acquaintance of all and sundry. The life of the island is pleasant and easy. He enjoyed the long idle talks in the lounge of the hotel and the gay evenings at the English club when a group of fellows would play pool. He liked Apia, straggling along the edge of the lagoon, with its stores and bungalows and its native village. Then there were weekends when he would ride over to the house of one planter or another and spend a couple of nights on the hills. He had never before known freedom or leisure, and he was intoxicated by the sunshine. When he rode through the bush, his head reeled a little at the beauty that surrounded him. The country was indescribably fertile. In parts the forest was still virgin, a tangle of strange trees, luxuriant undergrowth, and vine. It gave an impression that was mysterious and troubling. But the spot that entranced him was a pool a mile or two away from Apia, to which in the evenings he often went to bathe. There was a little river that bubbled over the rocks in a swift stream, and then, after forming the deep pool, ran on, shallow and crystalline, past a ford made by great stones, where the natives came sometimes to bathe or to wash their clothes. The coconut trees, with their frivolous elegance, grew thickly on the banks, all clad with trailing plants, and they were reflected in the green water. It was just such a scene as you might see in Devonshire among the hills, and yet with a difference, for it had a tropical richness, a passion, a scented languor, which seemed to melt the heart. The water was fresh but not cold, and it was delicious after the heat of the day. To bathe there refreshed not only the body but the soul. At the hour when Lawson went, there was not a soul, and he lingered for a long time, now floating idly in the water, now drying himself in the evening sun, enjoying the solitude and the friendly silence. He did not regret London then, nor the life that he had abandoned, for life as it was seemed complete and exquisite. It's kind of how I felt about Brisbane when I first came here, the first year at least, till we all turned to rot and evil with the Nazi libel. But actually that happened within the first 6 months, so the patina of this place wore off very early in the piece, just saying. But I truly did think I'd migrated to paradise, at least initially, till the ugliness of the inhabitants of the city started to effluvially froth and bubble forth, seeping like the sewage seeping under my house right now, no doubt. Well, Mama T has acquired the rather magical ability of turning shit to spiritual gold, and what can I say? It's a mission. It was here that he first saw Ethel, thinking that summer for him was going to be complete and exquisite. Sweet. Occupied till late by letters, which had to be finished for the monthly sailing of the boat next day, he rowed down one evening to the pool when the light was almost failing. He tied up his horse and sauntered to the bank. A girl was sitting there. She glanced round as he came and noiselessly slid into the water. She vanished like a naiad startled by the approach of a mortal. He was surprised and amused. He wondered where she had hidden herself. He swam downstream and presently saw her sitting on a rock. She looked at him with uncurious eyes. He called out a greeting in Samoan. Talofa! She answered him, suddenly smiling, and then let herself into the water again. She swam easily and her hair spread out behind her. He watched her cross the pool and climb out on the bank. Like all the natives, she bathed in a Mother Hubbard, and the water had made it cling to her slight body. She wrung out her hair, and as she stood there, unconcerned, she looked more than ever like a wild creature of the water or the woods. He saw now that she was half-caste. He swam towards her and, getting out, addressed her in English. You're having a late swim. She shook back her hair and let it spread over her shoulders in luxuriant curls. I like it when I'm alone, she said. So do I. She laughed with the childlike frankness of the native. She slipped a dry Mother Hubbard over her head and, letting down the wet one, stepped out of it. She wrung it out and was ready to go. She paused a moment irresolutely and then sauntered off. The night fell suddenly. Lawson went back to the hotel and, describing her to the men who were in the lounge shaking dice for drinks, soon discovered who she was. Her father was a Norwegian called Brevald, who was often to be seen in the bar of the Hotel Metropole drinking rum and water. He was a little old man, knotted and gnarled like an ancient tree, who had come out to the islands 40 years before as mate of a sailing vessel. Yes, Yoda. The Force is with us, my darlings. Always and forever with us. He had been a blacksmith, a trader, a planter, and at one time fairly well-to-do, but ruined by the great hurricane of the 90s. He had now nothing to live on but a small plantation of coconut trees. He had had 4 native wives, and, as he told you with a cracked chuckle, more children than he could count. But some had died and some had gone out into the world, so that now the only one left at home was Ethel. Let's make another cup of tea. This one will be cold. Watch me pull a face. It's a wonderful invention though. It's called a microwave. But I'm reading you a story. You must not get distracted, people. She's a peach, said Nelson, the supercargo of the Moana. I've given her the glad eye once or twice, but I guess there's nothing doing. "Old Brevolt's not that sort of a fool, Sonny," put in another, a man called Miller. "He wants a son-in-law who's prepared to keep him in comfort for the rest of his life." It was distasteful to Lawson that they should speak of the girl in that fashion. He made a remark about the departing mail and so distracted their attention. But next evening he went again to the pool. Ethel was there, and the mystery of the sunset, the deep silence of the water, the lithe grace of the coconut trees added to her beauty, giving it a profundity, a magic, which stirred the heart to unknown emotions. For some reason, that time he had the whim not to speak to her. She took no notice of her. She did not even glance in his direction. She swam about the green pool. She dived, she rested on the bank as though she were quite alone. He had a queer feeling that he was invisible. Scraps of poetry, half forgotten, floated across his memory, and vague recollections of the Greece he had negligently studied in his school days. When she had changed her wet clothes for dry ones and sauntered away, he found a scarlet hibiscus where she had been. It was a flower that she had worn in her hair when she came to bathe, and, having taken it out on getting into the water, had forgotten or not cared to put in again. He took it in his hands and looked at it with a singular emotion. He had an instinct to keep it, but his sentimentality irritated him, and he flung it away. It gave him quite a little pang to see it float down the stream. He wondered what strangeness it was in her nature that urged her to go down to this hidden pool when there was no likelihood that anyone should be there. The natives of the islands are devoted to water. They bathe somewhere or other every day, once, always, and often twice. But they bathe in bands, laughing and joyous, a whole family together, and you often saw a group of girls, dappled by the sun shining through the trees, with the half-castes among them, splashing about the shallows of the stream. It looked as though there were in this pool some secret which attracted Ethel against her will. Now the night had fallen, mysterious and silent, and he let himself down in the water softly in order to make no sound, and swam lazily in the warm darkness. The water seemed fragrant still from her slender body. He rode back to the town under the starry sky. He felt at peace with the world. Now he went every evening to the pool, and every evening he saw Ethel. Presently he overcame her timidity. She became playful and friendly. They sat together on the rocks above the pool where the water ran fast, and they lay side by side on the ledge that overlooked it, watching the gathering dusk envelop it with mystery. It was inevitable that their meetings should become known. In the South Seas, everyone seems to know everyone's business, and he was subjected to much rude chaff by the men at the hotel. He smiled and let them talk. It was not even worthwhile to deny their coarse suggestions. His feelings were absolutely pure. He loved Ethel as a poet might love the moon. He thought of her not as a woman, but as something not of this earth. She was the spirit of the pool. One day at the hotel, passing through the bar, he saw that old Brevoort, as ever in his shabby blue overalls, was standing there. Because he was Ethel's father, he had a desire to speak to him, so he went in, nodded, and ordering his own drink, casually turned and invited the old man to have one with him. They chatted for a few minutes of local affairs, and Lawson was uneasily conscious that the Norwegian was scrutinizing him with sly blue eyes. His manner was not agreeable. It was sycophantic, and yet behind the cringing air of an old man who had been worsted in his struggle with fate was a shadow of old truculence. Lawson remembered that he had once been captain of a schooner engaged in the slave trade, a blackbirder they call it in the Pacific, and he had a large hernia in the chest, which was the result of a wound received in a scrap with Solomon Islanders. The bell rang for luncheon. "Well, I must be off," said Lawson. "Why don't you come along to my place one time?" said Brevoort in his wheezy voice. "It's not very grand, but you'll be welcome. You know Ethel." "I'll come with pleasure." "Sunday afternoon's the best time." My Norwegian accent sounds very strange indeed, so I'll stop while I'm ahead, people. Brevoort's bungalow, shabby and bedraggled, stood among the coconut trees of the plantation, a little away from the main road that ran up to Vailima. Immediately around it grew huge plantains. With their tattered leaves, they had the tragic beauty of a lovely woman in rags. Everything was slovenly and neglected. Little black pigs, thin and high-backed, rooted about, and chickens clucked noisily as they picked at the refuse scattered here and there. 3 or 4 natives were lounging about the veranda. When Lawson asked for Brevoort, the old man's cracked voice called out to him, and he found him in the sitting room smoking an old briar pipe. Sit down and make yourself at home, he said. Ethel's just titivating. She came in. She wore a blouse and skirt, and her hair was done in the European fashion. Although she had not the wild, timid grace of the girl who came down every evening to the pool, she seemed now more usual and consequently more approachable. She shook hands with Lawson. It was the first time he had touched her hand. "I hope you'll have a cup of tea with us," she said. He knew she had been at a mission school, and he was amused, and at the same time touched by the company manners she was putting on for his benefit. Tea was already set out on the table, and in a minute old Brevout's fourth wife brought in the teapot. She was a handsome native, no longer very young, and she spoke but a few words of English. She smiled and smiled. Tea was rather a solemn meal, with a great deal of bread and butter and a variety of very sweet cakes, and the conversation was formal. Then a wrinkled old woman came in softly. "That's Ethel's granny," said old Brevout, noisily spitting on the floor. She sat on the edge of a chair, uncomfortably, so that you saw it was unusual for her, and she would have been more at ease on the ground, and remained silently staring at Lawson with fixed, shining eyes. In the kitchen behind the bungalow, someone began to play the concertina, and 2 or 3 voices were raised in a hymn, but they sang for the pleasure of the sounds rather than from piety. When Lawson walked back to the hotel, he was strangely happy. He was touched by the higgledy-piggledy way in which those people lived, and in the smiling good nature of Mrs. Brevout, in the little Norwegian's fantastic career, and in the shining, mysterious eyes of the old grandmother. He found something unusual and fascinating. It was a more natural life than any he had known. It was nearer to the friendly, fertile earth. Civilization repelled him at that moment, and by mere contact with these creatures of a more primitive nature, he felt a greater freedom. Please excuse the racist undertones there. I don't subscribe to that way of thinking or merely reading the story as presented by the author, who was a product of his time. He saw himself rid of the hotel, which already was beginning to irk him, settled in a little bungalow of his own, trim and white, in front of the sea, so that he had before his eyes always the multicoloured variety of the lagoon. He loved the beautiful island. London and England meant nothing to him any more. He was content to spend the rest of his days in that forgotten spot, rich in the best of the world's goods, love and happiness. He made up his mind that whatever the obstacles, nothing should prevent him from marrying Ethel. but there were no obstacles. He was always welcome at the Brevalds' house. The old man was ingratiating, and Mrs. Brevald smiled without ceasing. He had brief glimpses of natives who seemed somehow to belong to the establishment, and once he found a tall youth in a lava, his body tattooed, his hair white with lime, sitting with Brevald, and was told he was Mrs. Brevald's brother's son, but for the most part they kept out of his way. Ethel was delightful with him. The light in her eyes when she saw him filled him with ecstasy. She was charming and naive. He listened enraptured when she told him of the mission school at which she was educated and of the sisters. He went with her to the cinema, which was given once a fortnight, and danced with her at the dance which followed it. They came from all parts of the island for this, since gaieties are few in Upolu, and you saw there all the society of the place. The white ladies keeping a good deal to themselves, the half-castes very elegant in American clothes, the natives, strings of dark girls and white Mother Hubbards, and young men in unaccustomed ducks and white shoes. It was all very smart and gay. Ethel was pleased to show her friends the white admirer who did not leave her side. The rumour was soon spread that he meant to marry her, and her friends looked at her with envy. Back in the day, young girls thinking that getting married was the epitome of success, which for some lucky ones it still remains so. But don't mention the unlucky ones, and the unloved ones, and the unprotected ones. It was a great thing for a half-caste to get a white man to marry her. Even the less regular relation was better than nothing. But one could never tell what it would lead to. And Lawson's position as manager of the bank made him one of the catchers of the island. If he had not been so absorbed in Ethel, he would have noticed that many eyes were fixed on him curiously, and he would have seen the glances of the white ladies and noticed how they put their heads together and gossiped. Afterwards, when the men who lived at the hotel were having a whisky before turning in, Nelson burst out with, They say Lawson's going to marry that girl." "He's a damned fool then," said Miller. That explains everything. Miller was a German American who had changed his name from Müller, a big man, fat and bald-headed, with a round, clean-shaven face. He wore large gold-rimmed spectacles which gave him a benign look. and his ducks were always clean and white. He was a heavy drinker, invariably ready to stay up all night with the boys, but he never got drunk. He was jolly and affable, but very shrewd. Nothing interfered with his business. He represented a firm in San Francisco. Jobbers of the goods sold on the islands, calico, machinery and what not, and his good fellowship was part of his stock and trade. He doesn't know what he's up against, said Nelson. Someone ought to put him wise. Indeed, someone ought. Instead of slinking around like serpentine backstabbers, the truth is always welcome at Titania's Well. If you'll take my advice, you won't interfere in what don't concern you, said Miller. When a man's made up his mind to make a fool of himself, there's nothing like letting him. Cruel, innit? Very cruel. I'm all for having a good time with the girls out here, but when it comes to marrying them, this child ain't taking any. I'll tell the world. Chaplin was there, and now he had his say. I've seen a lot of fellows do it, and it's no good. You ought to have a talk with him, Chaplin, said Nelson. You know him better than anyone else does. My advice to Chaplin is to leave it alone, said Miller. Even in those days, Lawson was not popular, and really no one took enough interest in him to bother. Mrs. Chaplin talked it over with 2 or 3 of the white ladies, but they contented themselves with saying that it was a pity, and when he told her definitely that he was going to be married, it seemed too late to do anything. For a year, Lawson was happy. She took a bungalow at the point of the bay round which Apia is built, on the borders of a native village. It nestled charmingly among the coconut trees and faced the passionate blue of the Pacific. Ethel was lovely as she went about the little house, lithe and graceful, like some young animal of the woods, and she was gay, meaning cheerful, old English version of that, as I said, along with the distorted, archaic English and the racism. That word's going to pop up from time to time. They laughed a great deal. They talked nonsense. Sometimes 1 or 2 of the men at the hotel would come over and spend the evening, and often on a Sunday they would go for a day to some planter who had married a native. Now and then 1 or other of the half-caste traders who had a store in Apia would give a party, and they went to it. The half-castes treated Lawson quite differently now. His marriage had made him one of themselves, and they called him Bertie. They put their arms through his and smacked him on the back. He liked to see Ethel at these gatherings. Her eyes shone and she laughed. It did him good to see her radiant happiness. Sometimes Ethel's relations would come to the bungalow, old Brevelt, of course, and her mother, but cousins too, vague native women in Mother Hubbards, and men and boys in lavas, with their hair dyed red and their bodies elaborately tattooed. He would find them sitting there where he got back from the bank. He laughed indulgently. "Don't let them eat us out of hearth and home," he said. "They're my own family. I can't help doing something for them when they ask me." He knew that when a white man marries a native or a half-caste, he must expect her relations to look upon him as a gold mine. He took Ethel's face in his hands and kissed her red lips. Perhaps he could not expect her to understand that the salary which had amply sufficed for a bachelor must be managed with some care when it had to support a wife and a house. Then Ethel was delivered of a son. It was when Lawson first held the child in his arms that a sudden pang shot through his heart. He had not expected it to be so dark. After all, it had but a fourth part of native blood, and there was no reason really why it should not look just like an English baby. But huddled together in his arms, sallow, its head covered already with black hair, with huge black eyes, it might have been a native child. Since his marriage, he had been ignored by the white ladies of the colony. When he came across men in whose houses he had been accustomed to dine as a bachelor, they were a little self-conscious with him, and they sought to cover their embarrassment by an exaggerated cordiality. "Mrs. Lawson well?" they would say. "You're a lucky fellow. Damned pretty girl." But if they were with their wives and met him, and Ethel, they would feel it awkward when their wives gave Ethel a patronising nod. Lawson had laughed. "They're as dull as ditch water, the whole gang of them," he said. "It's not going to disturb my night's rest if they don't ask me to their dirty parties." But now it irked him a little. The little dark baby screwed up its face. That was his son. He thought of the half-caste children in Apia. They had an unhealthy look, sallow and pale, and they were odiously precocious. He had seen them on the boat going to school in New Zealand, and a school had to be chosen which took children with native blood in them. They were huddled together, brazen and yet timid, with traits that set them apart strangely from white people. They spoke the native language among themselves, and when they grew up, the men accepted smaller salaries because of their native blood. Girls might marry a white man, but boys had no chance. They must marry a half-caste like themselves or a native. Lawson made up his mind passionately that he would take his son away from the humiliation of such a life. At whatever cost, he must get back to Europe. And when he went in to see Ethel, frail and lovely in her bed, surrounded by native women, his determination was strengthened. If he took her away among his own people, she would belong more completely to him. He loved her so passionately. He wanted her to be one soul and one body with him. And he was conscious that here, with those deep roots attaching her to the native life, she would always keep something from him. She's just given him a baby for the love of all the gods. But this is how stupid men, in particular white men, in particular abusers, can be. He went to work quietly, urged by an obscure instinct of secrecy, and wrote to a cousin who was a partner in a shipping firm in Aberdeen, saying that his health, on account of which, like so many more, he had come out to the islands, was so much better, there seemed no reason why he should not return to Europe. He asked him to use what influence he could to get him a job, no matter how poorly paid, on D-side, where the climate was particularly suitable to such as suffered from diseases of the lungs. It takes 5 or 6 weeks for letters to get from Aberdeen to Samoa, and several had to be exchanged. He had plenty of time to prepare Ethel. She was as delighted as a child. He was amused to see how she boasted to her friends that she was going to England. It was a step up for her. She would be quite English there, and she was excited at the interest that approaching departure gave her. When at length a cable came offering him a post in a bank in Kincardineshire, she was beside herself with joy. Yes, I struggle with Celtic words too. Oh, smallest violin. I'll be in Scotland a 40, for ye and my true love will never be again. On the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Well, we'll see about that. When they're long, I'm joking about that, by the way. No idea what the future holds for me. Just hope it's kinder, more loyal, and more devoted, and more faithful, and sweet and pure. Did I mention kind? And certainly not a lie or a deception by the gods. When their long journey over, they were settled in the little Scots town with its granite houses. Lawson realised how much it meant to him to live once more among his own people. He looked back on the 3 years he had spent in Apia as exile and returned to the life that seemed the only normal one with a sigh of relief. It was good to play golf once more and to fish to fish properly. That was poor fun in the Pacific, when you just threw in your line and pulled out one big sluggish fish after another from the crowded sea, and it was good to see a paper every day with that day's news, and to meet men and women of your own sort, people you could talk to, and it was good to eat meat that was not frozen and to drink milk that was not canned. They were thrown upon their own resources much more than in the Pacific, and he was glad to have Ethel exclusively to himself. After 2 years of marriage, he loved her more devotedly than ever. He could hardly bear her out of his sight, and the need in him grew urgent for a more intimate communion between them. But it was strange that after the first excitement of arrival, she seemed to take less interest in the new life than he had expected. She did not accustom herself to the surroundings. She was a little lethargic. As the fine autumn darkened into winter, she complained of the cold. She lay half the morning in bed and the rest of the day on a sofa, reading novels sometimes, but more often doing nothing. She looked pinched. "Never mind, darling," he said. "You'll get used to it very soon, and wait till the summer comes. It can be almost as hot as an Apia." He felt better and stronger than he had done for years. The carelessness with which she managed her house had not mattered in Samoa, but here it was out of place. When anyone came, he did not want the place to look untidy, and, laughing, chaffing Ethel a little, he set about putting things in order. Ethel watched him indolently. She spent long hours playing with her son. She talked to him in the baby language of her own country. To distract her, Lawson bestirred himself to make friends among the neighbours, and now and then they went to little parties where the ladies sang drawing-room ballads and the men beamed in silent good nature. Ethel was shy. She seemed to sit apart. Sometimes Lawson, seized with a sudden anxiety, would ask her if she was happy. "Yes, I'm quite happy," she answered, but her eyes were veiled by some thought he could not guess. She seemed to withdraw into herself, so that he was conscious that he knew no more of her than when he had first seen her bathing in the pool. He had an uneasy feeling that she was concealing something from him, and because he adored her, it tortured him. "You don't regret Apia, do you?" he asked her once. "Oh no, I think it's very nice here." An obscure misgiving drove him to make disparaging remarks about the island and the people there. She smiled and did not answer. Very rarely she received a bundle of letters from Samoa, and then she went about for a day or two, with a set, pale face. Nothing would induce me ever to go back there, he said once. It's no place for a white man. But he grew conscious that sometimes, when he was away, Ethel cried. In Apia, she had been talkative, chatting volubly about all the little details of their common life, the gossip of the place, but now she gradually became silent, and though he increased his efforts to amuse her, she remained listless. It seemed to him that her recollections of the old life were drawing her away from him, and he was madly jealous of the island and of the sea, of Brevoort and all the dark-skinned people whom he remembered now with horror. When she spoke of Samoa, he was bitter and satirical. One evening, late in the spring, when the birch trees were bursting into leaf, coming home from a round of golf, he found her, not as usual lying on the sofa, but at the window, standing. She had evidently been waiting for his return. She addressed him the moment he came into the room. To his amazement, she spoke in Samoan. I can't stand it here. I can't live here any more. I hate it. I hate it. For God's sake, speak in a civilized language, he said irritably. She went up to him and clasped her arms around his body awkwardly, with a gesture that had in it something barbaric. Let's go away from here. Let's go back to Samoa. If you make me stay here, I shall die. I want to go home. Her passion broke suddenly, and she burst into tears. His anger vanished, and he drew her down on his knees. He explained to her that it was impossible for him to throw up his job, which after all meant his bread and butter. His place in Apia was long since filled. He had nothing to go back to there. He tried to put it to her reasonably, the inconveniences of life there, the humiliation to which they must be exposed, and the bitterness it must cause their son. Scotland's wonderful for education and that sort of thing. Schools are good and cheap, and he can go to the university at Aberdeen. I'll make a real Scot of him. They had called him Andrew Lawson, wanted him to become a doctor. He would marry a white woman. I'm not ashamed of being half native, Ethel said sullenly. Of course not, darling. There's nothing to be ashamed of. With her soft cheek against his, he felt incredibly weak. You don't know how much I love you, he said. I'll give anything in the world to be able to tell you what I've got in my heart. He sought her lips. The summer came. The highland valley was green and fragrant, and the hills were gay with the heather. One sunny day followed another in that sheltered spot, and the shade of the birch trees was grateful after the glare of the high road. Ethel spoke no more of Samoa, and Lawson grew less nervous. He thought she was resigned to her surroundings, and he felt that his love for her was so passionate that it could leave no room in her heart for any longing. One day the local doctor stopped him in the street. "I say, Lawson, your missus ought to be careful how she bathes in our highland streams. It's not like the Pacific, you know." Lawson was surprised and had not the presence of mind to conceal the fact. "I didn't know she was bathing." The doctor laughed. "A good many people have seen her. It makes them talk a bit, you know, because it seems a rum place to choose, the pool up above the bridge, and bathing isn't allowed there, but there's no harm in that. I don't know how she can stand the water." Clever girl, that was her protest. "I like how she thinks. Something the Mama T would have done too. If you won't take me home to Samoa, I'll bring Samoa to Scotland. Fuck you, motherfuckers." Yes, I like how she thinks. Good girl. Lawson knew the pool the doctor spoke of, and suddenly it occurred to him that in a way it was just like that pool at Upolu where Ethel had been in the habit of bathing every evening. A clear highland stream ran down a sinuous course, rocky, splashing gaily, and then formed a deep, smooth pool with a little sandy beach. Trees overshadowed it thickly, not coconut trees, but beeches, and the sun played fitfully through the leaves on the sparkling water. It gave him a shock. With his imagination, he saw Ethel go there every day and undress on the bank and slip into the water, cold, colder than that of the pool she loved at home, and for a moment regain the feeling of the past. He saw her once more as the strange, wild spirit of the stream, and it seemed to him fantastically that the running water called her. I have the same relationship to water. That afternoon he went along to the river. He made his way cautiously among the trees, and the grassy path deadened the sound of his steps. Presently he came to a spot from which he could see the pool. Ethel was sitting on the bank looking down into the water. She sat quite still. It seemed as though the water drew her irresistibly. He wondered what strange thoughts wandered through her head. At last she got up, and for a minute or two she was hidden from his gaze. Then he saw her again, wearing a Mother Hubbard, and with her little bare feet she stepped delicately over the mossy bank. She came to the water's edge and softly, without a splash, let herself down. She swam about quietly, and there was something not quite of a human being in the way she swam. He did not know why it affected him so queerly. He waited till she clambered out. She stood for a moment with the wet folds of her dress clinging to her body so that its shape was outlined, and then, passing her hands slowly over her breasts, gave a little sigh of delight. My girl, free in another paradigm. Then she disappeared. Lawson turned away and walked back to the village. He had a bitter pain in his heart, for he knew that she was still a stranger to him, and his hungry love was destined ever to remain unsatisfied indeed. He did not make any mention of what he had seen. He ignored this incident completely. I mean, you almost have to laugh, but it's actually not funny. But it is. Had to be there, it is. I just love how the gods take vengeance on my behalf via third-party proxies like YouTube and Somerset Maugham. It's delightful. It's delightful. It's glorious. I'm not actually seeking revenge, people. I'm just, the synchronicities are flowing rather magnificently, and it gives me pause for thought about the nature of our current reality here on planet Earth, with the dimensions and everything fiddled with by CERN and whoever else is fiddling with things. It's made life rather strange. He ignored the incident completely, but he looked at her curiously, trying to divine what was in her mind. Or she wants to go home, is what was in her mind. Simples. It's not rocket science. He redoubled the tenderness with which he used her. He sought to make her forget the deep longing of her soul by the passion of his love. Oh, dear goddess. As if he thought his penis would fix all that. Oh, but he's a man. We'll make excuses for that. They really do think like that, unless and alack. And then one day, when he came home, he was astonished to find her not in the house. "Where's Mrs. Lawson?" he asked the maid. "She went into Aberdeen, sir, with the baby," the maid answered, a little surprised at the question. "She said she would not be back till the last train." "Oh, all right." He was vexed that Ethel had said nothing to him about the excursion, but he was not disturbed, since of late she had been in now and again to Aberdeen, and he was glad that she should look at the shops and perhaps visit a cinema. He went to meet the last train, but when she did not come, he grew suddenly frightened. He went up to the bedroom and saw at once that her toilet things were no longer in their place. He opened the wardrobe and the drawers. They were half empty. She had bolted. He was seized with a passion of anger. It was too late that night to telephone to Aberdeen and make inquiries. but he knew already all that his inquiries might have taught him. With fiendish cunning, she had chosen a time when they were making up their periodical accounts at the bank, and there was no chance that he could follow her. He was imprisoned by his work. He took up a paper and saw that there was a boat sailing for Australia next morning. She must be now well on the way to London. He could not prevent the sobs that were wrung painfully from him. "I've done everything in the world for her," he cried, "and she had the heart to treat me like this. How cruel, how monstrously cruel." After 2 days of misery, he received a letter from her. It was written in her schoolgirl hand. She had always written with difficulty. "Dear Bertie, I couldn't stand it any more. I'm going home. Goodbye. Ethel." She did not say a single word of regret. She did not even ask him to come too. Lawson was prostrated. He found out where the ship made its first stop, and though he knew very well she would not come, sent a cable beseeching her to return. He waited with pitiful anxiety. He wanted her to send him just one word of love. She did not even answer. He passed through one violent phase after another. At one moment he told himself that he was well rid of her, and at the next that he would force her to return by withholding money. He was lonely and wretched. He wanted his boy, and he wanted her. He knew that, whatever he pretended to himself, there was only one thing to do, and that was to follow her. He could never live without her now. All his plans for the future were like a house of cards, and he scattered them with angry impatience. He did not care whether he threw away his chances for the future, for nothing in the world mattered but that he would get Ethel back again. Sounds more like a possession rather than real love, doesn't it, people of Earth? But that's just my thoughts on the matter. You'll have your own, and you're free to have them accordingly, as long as they don't impinge on my thoughts, because I'm in my sacred space at Titan as well. That's my channel. But no, I'm joking. You'll have your own thoughts, depending on your own life experiences and your own heartaches and breaks and your own treacheries and betrayals and whatever and so on and so forth. It's a human condition, you understand. Motherfuckers. She did ask him politely, "I want to go home." So it's his selfishness got him into the situation. Anyway, never mind. Continuing on with the story. I'm curious to see what's going to happen next too now. All very romantic, chasing after her. She ran away. Nobody ever chased after me or wrote me love letters. But anyway. The mama tea. I've got 2 very handsome boys in my life now. And little as they are, they have no spite in them. Although when Kermie bit me on my shoulder with his hypodermic needle-sized beak, it really did fucking hurt, but, well, I've been more conscious of not getting too close to him since. Love from a distance, even for birdies. Oh, I miss my Charlie. Charlie was awesome. Charlie was one of a kind. Charlie like the mama tea, was an anomaly. Right, where were we? As soon as he could, he went into Aberdeen and told the manager of his bank that he meant to leave at once. The manager remonstrated. The short notice was inconvenient. Lawson would not listen to reason. He was determined to be free before the next boat sailed, and it was not until he was on board of her, having sold everything he possessed, that in some measure he regained his calm. Till then, to those who had come into contact with him, he seemed hardly sane. His last action in England was to cable to Ethel and Apia that he was joining her. He sent another cable from Sydney, and when at last with the dawn his boat crossed the bar at Apia and he saw once more the white houses straggling along the bay, he felt an immense relief. The doctor came on board and the agent. They were both old acquaintances, and he felt kindly towards their familiar faces. He had a drink or two with them for old time's sake, and also because he was desperately nervous. He was not sure if Ethel would be glad to see him. When he got into the launch and approached the wharf, he scanned anxiously the little crowd that waited. She was not there, and his heart sank, but then he saw Brevoort in his old blue clothes, and his heart warmed towards him. "Where's Ethel?" he said as he jumped on shore. "She's down at the bungalow. She's living with us." Lawson was dismayed, but he put on a jovial air. "Well, have you got room for me? I dare say it'll take a week or two to fix ourselves up." "Oh yes, I guess we can make room for you." After passing through the custom house, that wasn't too bad, was it? Maybe sounds a little bit too German though, what do you think? No accents. But every now and then I like to try, just for the sheer mischief of it, you understand. Right, where were we? After passing through the custom house, he went to the hotel, and there Lawson was greeted by several of his old friends. There were a good many rounds of drinks before it seemed possible to get away, and when they did go at last to Brevoort's house, they were both rather gay. I think they mean pissed. Pissed is the word. He clasped Ethel in his arms. He had forgotten all his bitter thoughts in the joy of beholding her once more. His mother-in-law was pleased to see him, and so was the old wrinkled beldame, her mother. Natives and half-castes came in, and they all sat round, beaming on him. Brevoort had a bottle of whisky, and everyone who came was given a nip. Lawson sat with his little dark-skinned boy on his knees. They had taken his English clothes off him, and he was stark, with Ethel by his side in a Mother Hubbard. He felt like a returning prodigal. In the afternoon he went down to the hotel again, and when he got back he was more than gay. He was drunk. Okay, well in that case they meant tipsy earlier. Tipsy. I stand corrected. I can admit when I'm wrong. Don't like it, but I can admit it. It happens occasionally. Ethel and her mother knew that white men got drunk now and then was what you expected of them, and they laughed good-naturedly as they helped him to bed. But in a day or two he set about looking for a job. He knew that he could not hope for such a position as that which he had thrown away to go to England, but with his training he could not fail to be useful to one of the trading firms, and perhaps in the end he might not lose by the change. After all, you can't make money in a bank, he said. Trade's the thing. He had hopes that he would soon make himself so indispensable that he would get someone to take him into partnership, and there was no reason why in a few years he should not be a rich man. As soon as I'm fixed up, we'll find ourselves a shack, he told Ethel. We can't go on living here. Brevout's bungalow was so small that they were all piled on one another, and there was no chance of ever being alone. There was neither peace nor privacy. Well, there's no hurry. We shall be all right here till we find just what we want. It took him a week to get settled, and then he entered the firm of a man called Bain. But when he talked to Ethel about moving, she said she wanted to stay where she was till her baby was born, for she was expecting another child. Lawson tried to argue with her. If you don't like it, she said, go and live at the hotel. He grew suddenly pale. Ethel, how can you suggest that? She shrugged her shoulders. What's the good of having a house of our own when we can live here? He yielded. When Lawson, after his work, went back to the bungalow, he found it crowded with natives. They lay about smoking, sleeping, drinking kava, and they talked incessantly. The place was grubby and untidy. His child crawled about playing with native children, and it heard nothing spoken but Samoan. He fell into the habit of dropping into the hotel on his way home to have a few cocktails, for he could only face the evening and the crowd of friendly natives when he was fortified with liquor. And all the time, though he loved her more passionately than ever, he felt that Ethel was slipping away from him. When the baby was born, he suggested that they should get into a house of their own, but Ethel refused. Her stay in Scotland seemed to have thrown her back on her own people now that she was once more among them with a passionate zest, and she turned to her native ways with abandon. Lawson began to drink more. Every Saturday night he went to the English club and got blind drunk. He had the peculiarity that as he grew drunk, he grew quarrelsome, and once he had a violent dispute with Bain, his employer. Bain dismissed him, and he had to look out for another job. He was idle for 2 or 3 weeks, and during these, sooner than sit in the bungalow, he lounged about in the hotel or at the English club and drank. It was more out of pity than anything else that Miller, the German-American, took him into his office. But he was a businessman, and though Lawson's financial skill made him valuable, the circumstances were such that he could hardly refuse a smaller salary than he had had before, and Miller did not hesitate to offer it to him. Ethel and Brevoort blamed him for taking it, since Pedersen, the half-caste, offered him more. But he resented bitterly the thought of being under the orders of a half-caste. When Ethel nagged him, he burst out furiously, "I'll see myself dead before I work for a nigger." "You may have to," she said. And in 6 months he found himself forced to this final humiliation. The passion for liquor had been gaining on him. He was often heavy with drink, and he did his work badly. Miller warned him once or twice, and Lawson was not the man to accept remonstrance easily. One day, in the midst of an altercation, he put on his hat and walked out. But by now his reputation was well known, and he could find no one to engage him. You know, in the 70s, my father once walked out of 3 jobs in one day. That's how plentiful work was and how crazy he was. Had a job in the morning, quit by lunchtime, did that job for a few hours, had another one, walked away from that at 5 o'clock, came home. Completely fucking unstable. But then, how did his daughter end up almost fucking murdered and financially raped as well? So maybe it's karma, or maybe it's just fucking Maybelline. But I actually tried to stick at jobs. I stayed in a very unhappy, very toxic job for 12 months in a traineeship, just to prove that I had stickability and stamina and guts and courage and honour. And I got that stupid certificate 3 in office admin, which was hilarious because I had already qualified in the equivalent certification as a young woman. And after that, and then I had a few jobs after that, which was so abusive, so vile, I almost suicided. And then I never worked again. I said, that's it, I'm done. But I mean, for someone who's never worked again in a professional capacity for other people, as you can see by my YouTube channel, my silversmithing journey, I work very hard when I have something worth working towards and that sparks joy, and I'm not oppressed by other people's ignominy. It's a shame I couldn't turn it into a proper thriving little business, because it sparks joy and it's creative and but I wasn't supported because I dared to speak out about the COVID epoch. I dared to resist the COVID penetrations of the donut kind. I dared to say no to preserve what was left of my already precarious health. I dared to dance in public places while monsters around me making handicapped faces with their pterodactyl fucking heads on their necks tried to destroy me. For what? Just my merest existence and my love of the dance. Seriously, absurdist. But anyway, we carry on. We carry on, people of Earth. Mama T will be going dancing again too, because no one has the right to stop me from living my best life. A woman who came in clean and clear. On the other hand, can I really be bothered with people that were so cruel and vindictive and feckless? It's a dilemma, isn't it? To dance or not to dance, that is the question. Whether it be nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous malfeasance and cuckoldry for an affair I didn't even actually have, being punished for some absurdity that went on in their minds, not mine. It's absurdist. So, Mama T will dance when I feel like it, on my terms. Where was I? Ah, yes. He'd put on his hat and walked out. But by now his reputation was well known and could find no one to engage him. For a while he idled, and then he had an attack of delirium tremens. When he recovered, shameful and weak, he could no longer resist the constant pressure, and he went to Pedersen and asked him for a job. Pedersen was glad to have a white man in his store, and Lawson's skill at figures made him useful. From that time his degeneration was rapid. The white people gave him the cold shoulder. They were only prevented from cutting him completely by disdainful pity and by a certain dread of his angry violence when he was drunk. He became extremely susceptible and was always on the lookout for affront. He lived entirely among the natives and half-castes, but he had no longer the prestige of the white man. They felt his loathing for them, and they resented his attitude of superiority. He was one of themselves now, and they did not see why he should put on airs. Brevoort, who had been ingratiating and obsequious, now treated him with contempt. Ethel had made a bad bargain. There were disgraceful scenes, and once or twice the two men came to blows. When there was a quarrel, Ethel took the part of her family. They found he was better drunk than sober, for when he was drunk, he would lie on the bed or on the floor, sleeping heavily. Then he became aware that something was being hidden from him. When he got back to the bungalow for the wretched half-native supper, which was his evening meal, often Ethel was not in. If he asked where she was, Brevoort told him she had gone to spend the evening with one or other of her friends. Just checking how many more pages because we're running out of we won't be able to finish this in one video. Oh well, not to worry, we'll continue on in part 2, but tomorrow, because you can tell by my triggering that I'm getting tired, and it is what it is, people are there. When he got back to the bungalow for the wretched half-native supper, which was his evening meal, often Ethel was not in. If he asked where she was, Brevoort told him she had gone to spend the evening with one or other of her friends. Once he followed her to the house Brevoort had mentioned and found she was not there. On her return, he asked her where they had been, and she told him her father had made a mistake. She had been to so-and-so's, and he knew she was lying. She was in her best clothes, her eyes were shining, and she looked lovely. "Don't try any monkey tricks on me, my girl," he said, "or I'll break every bone in your body." "You drunken beast," she said scornfully. He fancied that Mrs. Brevoort and the old grandmother looked at him maliciously, and he ascribed Brevoort's good humour with him, so unusual those days, to his satisfaction at having something up his sleeve against his son-in-law. And then, the suspicions aroused, he imagined that the white men gave him curious glances. When he came into the lounge of the hotel, the sudden silence which fell upon the company convinced him that he had been the subject of the conversation. Something was going on and everyone knew it but himself. He was seized with furious jealousy. He believed that Ethel was carrying on with one of the white men, and he looked at one after the other with scrutinizing eyes, but there was nothing to give him even a hint. He was helpless, because he could find no one on whom definitely to fix his suspicions. He went about like a raving maniac, looking for someone on whom to vent his wrath. Chance caused him in the end to hit upon the man who of all others least deserved to suffer from his violence. One afternoon, when he was sitting in the hotel by himself, moodily, Chaplin came in and sat down beside him. Perhaps Chaplin was the only man on the island who had any sympathy for him. They ordered drinks and chatted a few minutes about the races that were shortly to run. Then Chaplin said, "I guess we shall have to fork out money for new dresses." Lawson sniggered. Since Mrs. Chaplin held the purse strings, if she wanted a new frock for the occasion, she would certainly not ask her husband for the money. "How is your missus?" asked Chaplin, desiring to be friendly. "What the hell's that got to do with you?" said Lawson, knitting his dark brows. "I was only asking a civil question." "Well, keep your civil questions to yourself." Chaplin was not a patient man. His long residence in the tropics, the whisky bottle, and his domestic affairs had given him a temper hardly more under control than Lawson's. "Look here, my boy, when you're in my hotel, you behave like a gentleman, or you'll find yourself in the street before you can say knife." Lawson's lowering face grew dark and red. "Let me just tell you once and for all, and you can pass it on to the others," he said, panting with rage. "If any of you fellows come messing around with my wife, he'd better look out." "Who do you think wants to mess around with your wife?" "I'm not such a fool as you think. I can see a stone wall in front of me as well as most men, and I warn you straight, that's all. I'm not going to put up with any hanky-panky. Not on your life. Look here, you'd better clear out of here and come back when you're sober. I shall clear out when I choose, and not a minute before, said Lawson. 'Twas an unfortunate boast, for Chaplin, in the course of his experience as a hotel keeper, had acquired a peculiar skill in dealing with gentlemen whose room he preferred to their company, and the words were hardly out of Lawson's mouth before he found himself caught by the collar and arm and hustled, not without force, into the street. He stumbled down the steps into the blinding glare of the sun. It was in consequence of this that he had his first violent scene with Ethel. Smarting with humiliation and unwilling to go back to the hotel, he went home that afternoon earlier than usual. He found Ethel dressing to go out. As a rule, she lay about in a Mother Hubbard, barefoot, with a flower in her dark hair, but now, in white silk stockings and high-heeled shoes, she was doing up a pink muslin dress, which was the newest she had. "You're making yourself very smart," he said. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the Cross Keys." "I'll come with you." "Why?" she asked coolly. "I don't want you to gad about by yourself all the time." "You're not asked." "I don't care a damn about that. You're not going without me." "You'd better lie down till I'm ready." She thought he was drunk, and if he once settled himself on the bed would quickly drop off to sleep. He sat down on a chair and began to smoke a cigarette. She watched him with increasing irritation. When she was ready, he got up. It happened by an unusual chance that there was no one in the bungalow. Brayvelt was working on the plantation, and his wife had gone into Apia. Ethel faced him. "I'm not going with you. You're drunk." "That's a lie. You're not going without me." She shrugged her shoulders and tried to pass him, but he caught her by the arm and held her. "Let me go, you devil," she said, breaking into Samoan. "Why do you want to go without me? Haven't I told you I'm not going to put up with any monkey tricks?" She clenched her fist and hit him in the face. He lost all control of himself. All his love, all his hatred welled up in him, and he was beside himself. "I'll teach you," he shouted. "I'll teach you." He seized a riding whip which happened to be under his hand and struck her with it. She screamed, and the scream maddened him, so that he went on striking her again and again. His shrieks rang through the bungalow, and he cursed her as he hit. Then he flung her on the bed. She lay there sobbing with pain and terror. He threw the whip away from him and rushed out of the room. Ethel heard him go, and she stopped crying. She looked round cautiously, then she raised herself. She was sore, but she had not been badly hurt, and she looked at her dress to see if it was damaged. The native women are not unused to blows. What he had done did not outrage her. When she looked at herself in the glass and arranged her hair, her eyes was shining. There was a strange look in them. Perhaps, then, she was nearer loving him than she had ever been before. A fantasy in the writer's head, I might add. I know well what that shining look means. But Lawson, driven forth blindly, stumbled through the plantation, and suddenly exhausted, weak as a child, flung himself on the ground at the foot of a tree. He was miserable and ashamed. He thought of Ethel, and in the yielding tenderness of his love, all his bones seemed to grow soft within him. He thought of the past and of his hopes, and he was aghast at what he had done. He wanted her more than ever. He wanted to take her in his arms. He must go to her at once. He got up. He was so weak that he staggered as he walked. He went into the house, and she was sitting in their cramped bedroom in front of her looking-glass. "Oh, Ethel, forgive me. I'm so awfully ashamed of myself. I didn't know what I was doing." He fell on his knees before her and timidly stroked the skirt of her dress. "I can't bear to think of what I did. It's awful. I think I was mad. There's no one in the world I love as I love you. I'd do anything to save you from pain, and I've hurt you. I can never forgive myself, but for God's sake, say you forgive me." He heard her shriek still. It was unendurable. She looked at him silently. He tried to take her hands, and the tears streamed from his eyes. In his humiliation, he hid his face in her lap, and his frail body shook with sobs. An expression of utter contempt came over her face. She had the native woman's disdain of a man who abased himself before a woman. A weak creature. And for a moment she had been on the point of thinking there was something in him. He grovelled at her feet like a cur. She gave a little scornful kick. "Get out," she said. "I hate you." He tried to hold her, but she pushed him aside. She stood up. She began to take off her dress. She kicked off her shoes and slid the stockings off her feet. Then she slipped on her old Mother Hubbard. "Where are you going?" "What's that got to do with you?" "I'm going down to the pool." "Let me come too," he said. He asked as though he were a child. "Can't you even leave me that?" He hid his face in his hands, crying miserably, while she, her eyes hard and cold, stepped past him and went out. From that time She entirely despised him, and though, herded together in the small bungalow, Lawson and Ethel with her 2 children, Brevoort, his wife and her mother, and the vague relations and hangers-on who were always in and about, they had to live cheek by jowl. Lawson, ceasing to be of any account, was hardly noticed. He left in the morning after breakfast and came back only to have supper. He gave up the struggle, and when for want of money he could not go to the English club, he spent the evening playing hearts with old Brevoort and the natives. Except when he was drunk, he was cowed and listless. Ethel treated him like a dog. She submitted at times to his fits of wild passion, and she was frightened by the gusts of hatred with which they were followed, but when afterwards he was cringing and lachrymose, she had such a contempt for him that she could have spat in his face. Sometimes he was violent, but now she was prepared for him. And when he hit her, she kicked and scratched and bit. They had horrible battles, in which he had not always the best of it. Very soon it was known all over Apia that they got on badly. There was little sympathy for Lawson, and at the hotel the general surprise was that old Brevoort did not kick him out of the place. "Brevoort's a pretty ugly customer," said one of the men. "I shouldn't be surprised if he put a bullet into Lawson's carcass one of these days." Ethel still went in the evenings to bathe in the silent pool. It seemed to have an attraction for her that was not quite human. Just that attraction you might imagine that a mermaid who had won a soul could have for the cool salt waves of the sea. And sometimes Lawson went also. I do not know what urged him to go, for Ethel was obviously irritated by his presence. Perhaps it was because, in that spot, he hoped to regain the clean rapture which had filled his heart when he first saw her. Perhaps only with the madness of those who love them that love them not. From the feeling that his obstinacy could force love. One day he strolled down there with a feeling that was rare with him now. He felt suddenly at peace with the world. The evening was drawing in, and the dusk seemed to cling to the leaves of the coconut trees like a little thin cloud. A faint breeze stirred them noiselessly. A crescent moon hung just over their tops. He made his way to the bank. He saw Ethel in the water, floating on her back. Her hair streamed out all around her, and she was holding in her hand a large hibiscus. He stopped a moment to admire her. She was like Ophelia. "Hello, Ethel," he cried joyfully. She made a sudden movement and dropped the red flower. It floated idly away. She swam a stroke or two till she knew there was ground within her depth, and then stood up. "Go away," she said. "Go away." He laughed. Don't be selfish. There's plenty of room for both of us. Why can't you leave me alone? I want to be by myself. Hang it all, I want to bathe, he answered good-humouredly. Go down to the bridge. I don't want you here. I'm sorry for that, he said, smiling still. He was not in the least angry, and he hardly noticed that she was in a passion. He began to take off his coat. Go away, she shrieked. I won't have you here. Can't you even leave me this? Go away. Don't be silly, darling. She bent down and picked up a sharp stone and flung it quickly at him. He had no time to duck. It hit him on the temple. With a cry, he put his hand to his head, and when he took it away, it was wet with blood. Ethel stood still, panting with rage. He turned very pale and, without a word, taking up his coat, went away. Ethel let herself fall back into the water, and the stream carried her slowly down to the ford. The stone had made a jagged wound, and for some days Lawson went about with a bandaged head. He had invented a likely story to account for the accident when the fellows at the club asked him about it, but he had no occasion to use it. No one referred to the matter. He saw them cast surreptitious glances at his head, but not a word was said. The silence could only mean that they knew how he came by his wound. He was certain now that Ethel, had a lover, and they all knew who it was. But there was not the smallest indication to guide him. He never saw Ethel with anyone. No one showed a wish to be with her, or treated him in a manner that seemed strange. Wild rage seized him, and having no one to vent it on, he drank more and more heavily. A little while before I came to the island, he had had another attack of delirium tremens. I met Ethel at the house of a man called Castor, who lived 2 or 3 miles from Apia with a native wife. I had been playing tennis with him, and when we were tired, he suggested a cup of tea. We went into the house, and in the untidy living room found Ethel chatting with Mrs. Castor. "Hello, Ethel," he said. "I didn't know you were here." I could not help looking at her with curiosity. I tried to see what there was in her to have excited in Lawson such a devastating passion. But who can explain these things? It was true that she was lovely. She reminded one of the red hibiscus, the common flower of the hedgerow in Samoa, with its grace and its languor and its passion. But what surprised me most, taking into consideration the story I knew even then a good deal of, was her freshness and simplicity. She was quiet and a little shy. There was nothing coarse or loud about her. She had not the exuberance common to the half-caste, and it was almost impossible to believe that she would be the virago that the horrible scenes between husband and wife, which were now common knowledge, indicated. In her pretty pink frock and high-heeled shoes, she looked quite European. You could hardly have guessed at that dark background of native life in which she felt herself so much more at home. I did not imagine that she was at all intelligent, and I should not have been surprised if a man, after living with her for some time, had found the passion which had drawn him to her sink into boredom. It suggested itself to me that in her elusiveness, like a thought that presents itself to consciousness and vanishes before it can be captured by words, lay her peculiar charm. By that he means her freedom. Drives me wild, doesn't it? Some of them want to kill you, to contain it, to steal it, to destroy it. Motherfuckers. Right. But perhaps that was merely fancy, and if I had known nothing about her, I should have seen in her only a pretty little half-caste, like another. She talked to me of the various things which they talk of to the stranger in Samoa, of the journey, and whether I had slid down the water rock at Papasia, and if I meant to stay in a native village. She talked to me of Scotland, and perhaps I noticed in her a tendency to enlarge on the sumptuousness of her establishment there. She asked me naively if I knew Mrs. This and Mrs. That, with whom she had been acquainted when she lived in the north. Then Miller, the fat German American, came in. He shook hands all round very cordially and sat down, asking in his loud, cheerful voice for a whisky and soda. He was very fat and he sweated profusely. He took off his gold-rimmed spectacles and wiped them. You saw then that his little eyes, benevolent behind the large round glasses, were shrewd and cunning. The party had been somewhat dull till he came, but he was a good story-teller and a jovial fellow. Soon he had the two women, Ethel and my friend's wife, laughing delightedly at his sallies. He had a reputation on the island of a ladies' man, and you could see how this fat, gross fellow, old and ugly, had yet the possibility of fascination. His humour was on a level with the understanding of his company, an affair of vitality and assurance, and his western accent gave a peculiar point to what he said. At last he turned to me. Well, or that should be, well, if we want to get back for dinner, we'd better be going. I'll take you along in my machine, if you like. I thanked him and got up. He shook hands with the others, went out of the room, massive and strong in his walk, and climbed into his car. Pretty little thing, Lawson's wife, I said, as we drove along. Too bad the way he treats her, knocks her about. Gets my dander up when I hear of a man hitting a woman. We went on a little. Then he said, he was a darned fool to marry her. I said so at the time. If he hadn't, he'd have had the whip hand over her. He's yalla. That's what he is. Yalla. The year was drawing to its end, and the time approached when I was to leave Samoa. My boat was scheduled to sail for Sydney on the 4th of January. Christmas Day had been celebrated at the hotel with suitable ceremonies, but it was looked upon as no more than a rehearsal for New Year, and the men who were accustomed to foregather in the lounge determined on New Year's Eve to make a night of it. There was an uproarious dinner, after which the party sauntered down to the English Club a simple little frame house to play pool. There was a great deal of talking, laughing, and betting, but some very poor play, except on the part of Miller, who had drunk as much as any of them, all far younger than he, but had kept unimpaired the keenness of his eye and the sureness of his hand. He pocketed the young men's money with humour and urbanity. After an hour of this I grew tired and went out. I crossed the street and came to the beach. 3 coconut trees grew there. We're going to run out of video. Damn it. Anyway, I'll read until we get cut off, people there. 3 coconut trees grew there, like 3 moon maidens waiting for their lovers to ride out to the sea, and I sat at the foot of one of them, watching the lagoon and the nightly assemblage of the stars. I do not know where Lawson had been during the evening, but between 10 and 11 he came along to the club. He shambled down the dusty, empty road, feeling dull and bored, and when he reached the club, before going into the billiard room, went into the bar to have a drink by himself. He had a shyness now about joining the company of white men when there were a lot of them together, and needed a stiff dose of whisky to give him confidence. He was standing with the glass in his hand when Miller came into him. He was in his shirt sleeves and still held his cue. He gave the bartender a glance. "Get out, Jack," he said. The bartender, a native in a white jacket and a red lava, without a word, slid out of the small room. "Look here, I've been wanting to have a few words with you, Lawson," said the big American. "Well, that's one of the few things you can have free, gratis, and for nothing on this damned island." Miller fixed his gold spectacles more firmly on his nose and held Lawson with his cold, determined eyes. "See here, young fella, I understand you've been knocking Mrs. Lawson about again. I'm not going to stand for that. If you can't stop it right now, I'll break every bone of your dirty little body." Then Lawson knew what he had been trying to find out so long. It was Miller. The appearance of the man, fat, bald-headed, with his round bare face and double chin and the gold spectacles, his age, his benign, shrewd look like that of a renegade priest, and the thought of Ethel so slim and virginal filled him with a sudden horror. Whatever his faults, Lawson was no coward, and without a word he hit out violently at Miller. Miller quickly warded the blow with the hand that held the cue, and then, with a great swing of his right arm, brought his fist down on Lawson's ear. Lawson was 4 inches shorter than the American, and he was slightly built, frail and weakened not only by illness and the enervating tropics, but by drink. He fell like a log and lay half-dazed at the foot of the bar. Miller took off his spectacles and wiped them with a handkerchief. "I guess you know what to expect now," You've had your warning, and you'd better take it." He took up his cue and went back into the billiard room. There was so much noise there that no one knew what had happened. Lawson picked himself up. He put his hand to his ear, which was singing still. Then he slunk out of the club. I saw a man. We're going to go now.